Welcome everybody to episode 29 of Game Retail Ramblings. I'm your host Travis Severance, coming to you live from Millennium Game Studios in cozy, toasty, but a little bit cold Rochester, New York today. I wanted to thank everybody. We had a big milestone. We crossed over 1,000 subs, which was something that we were really dragging our feet on the last couple of episodes. We ended up picking up 10% new subs from the last video, so apparently you guys like CCGs. Go figure. Which is cool because that's kind of my wheelhouse in the way that I came into the industry. So thanks to everybody for doing that. I wanted to touch base. Today we're going to talk all about Magic. Next week we'll probably run a little bit early. I'm going to talk all about Black Friday sales, the way that we approach Black Friday as sort of a retail holiday and what we do for that weekend. I know there's a whole bunch of different retail takes, and I want to just sort of lay out to everybody what we're going to do here at the store. So if you're a customer, you can kind of take a look at that. If you're a retailer thinking about ideas or looking at what you might do in your store, it'll be pretty late at that point to make some of those decisions. We've been promoting the sale for a couple weeks now, but it'll be the biggest sales day for us. It is every single year. Last week we talked about all the CCGs. The conversation went well. The feedback was good. The comments were popping in there. I did my best to try to answer as many of the questions as I could. Today we're going to talk about kind of the granddaddy of them all, Magic. Magic started the whole entire CCG industry. I started playing Magic in August of 1994, so that's going to date me a little bit. I was in high school at the time. My best friend had come back from scout camp. Him and his brother were big into Boy Scouts of America, and they both had decks, and I immediately needed decks. We used to play D&D together all the time, and then all of a sudden it got switched from D&D right over to Magic all the time, every day. And it was, at that time, Revised had just come out. So my first box of Magic that I ever purchased was from an old bookstore chain called B. Dalton Books. And I went and I asked to buy an entire box, and the person at the register had to go and ask the manager if it was okay to sell an entire box because nobody had bought an entire box at that time. And I think that box of Revised cost me right around $100. So that's sort of where it started. I continued playing Magic for quite a while, and then I sort of had an on-again, off-again relationship with Magic based on what I was doing in my life. So I've come into and gotten out of Magic a lot of times. I used to share an apartment with a guy who was top 8 at Worlds in Australia the year that they were there. So I've known some really, really high competitive Magic players and played with some really good players. Overall, I'd say at the height of my Magic career here, we had quite a few players in the Rochester area that were playing pretty competitively. We showed up to a lot of events. There were a ton of people that would come down from Buffalo and Syracuse, and those guys taught me how to play the game really well, and I was almost average, I would say, when I got done, because they were actually really, really good. So I want to talk about Magic as Magic is today and moving forward, but I want to take a trip back, and I want to sort of talk about the past a little bit too. And I'm not going to go way back. This isn't a Magic timeline conversation. This is sort of about more focused on where I was last year at this time versus where I am this year at this time. And if I go back to 2023 felt pretty brutal to me as somebody that was trying to retail Magic. There was a whole lot of stuff that we ended up dealing with on the retail side of things that didn't go great for us. The one that got the most coverage was the Pinkerton sending somebody over because somebody posted a video of cracked packs early. But we dealt with Amazon dumps that year. There were 16 secret layers. They talked about the set booster and play booster going away and this new booster coming out. Walking Dead set was all of a sudden this thing. You know, the Magic 30 event was sort of a debacle based on what some of the customers that we had that went there and traveled to that event and stuff. They had an AI art scandal in the middle of that. In December, WotC laid off 1,100 people. That was after they had laid off 800 previously. So there was a whole lot of moving parts going on for them as a corporation, and a bunch of different things that were happening for them internally. So I assume that some of the issues that were happening inside the brand and stuff were sort of just due to the coming and going nature of some of the resources that they had attached to those things that were moving on, or the people that got removed from that, and then installing new people. And it takes a long time to get them sort of up to speed. So this time last year, boxes had sort of tanked. Things weren't going well as far as that goes. So I was liquidating as much of it as I possibly could. We were told that Crimson Vow and Midnight Hunt were going to be able to sit around for a little while. It was sort of a thing where it felt like that was pressure from distribution to have those sets kind of hang around, not something that they were making an actual strategic decision to extend it for a year. We were sitting on product, they were sitting on product. Product needed to move through the system and move through the channel. I will say that when they made that announcement, the box prices did move up 10 to 15%, give or take, and there were definitely some times when it was a heck of a lot easier to get rid of that stuff. You know, there was a time when Baldur's Gate hit, and it was just destitute. The set couldn't be sold for any dollar amount, and we got out from underneath that as well. And it kind of shows the power of what the brand has over a period of time. But it was a situation where I was definitely not feeling good about my inventory position. We moved through as much of that product as we possibly could. I kept some stuff on the shelf so that I could continue to sell it locally, but the standard scene was non-existent. Commander was the only reason basically anybody was coming in outside of the players that we had that were playing Legacy and Modern. So pack sales, box sales, that sort of thing, if it wasn't a master set or wasn't something that was Commander popular, things just weren't going great. Our pre-release attendance was not in a good space. I looked at the announcement when they talked about the new sets that were coming out. I didn't see a lot of hope in what they were putting up on the screen. I did look at Bloomburrow as an opportunity. I was like, okay, Anthropomorphic is a place where I think they could go and they could do really well at the time. Nature themes board games were really kicking butt for us here. The Root role-playing game had just come out from Kickstarter, and that was selling very well. Humblewood before that had been a thing. So it's certainly an area where I thought that something that's Magic themed would hit really, really well. But when I looked at the rest of the stuff, starting the year out, it was Ravnica Remastered, and that set hit, and it was kind of a dud for us. It didn't do really well. It was pretty expensive, and sales were not great. And then we followed that with Karlov Manor, and when I looked at Karlov Manor, I wasn't really thrilled with where we were going there. It's a murder mystery thing with planeswalkers inside of a castle, inside of a beloved realm, I guess, but it just felt so tight, and it didn't feel like there was a lot of room to go. And then they started releasing some of the themes that were going to be involved in that and the treatments that were going to be on the cards, and it didn't sell well. It still hasn't sold well. Now, that said, the odd part about Karlov to me is, if I look at the set as far as taking the cards pound for pound, I think the set punches above its weight class. There's some really strong cards in there, which is the reason why. There are two reasons. I have the pricing on that is market pricing, which is as close to cost as I can be as far as that product goes. But I'm not throwing it up on TCG Player and trying to liquidate it like I did before. And part of that has to do with the fact that they announced that they were going to do 3 years worth of standard, which I'll talk about that a little bit later and what sort of impact that I think that was going to have. But looking further at the release schedule, they announced Fallout, and I was very meh on Fallout, and they were as well, and so was the rest of the world, because we ordered that stuff and it was gone immediately and there wasn't a lot there. And I think I certainly didn't know what sort of impact the Netflix show was going to have on the sales of Fallout stuff. So when the Netflix show came out and I watched it the day that it released, I was like, oh boy, we're going to be in for a ride. So we had some Fantasy Flight board games. We had the role-playing games from Free League. There was the miniatures game that Modifius had. So we immediately set up a display for that thing, and then I tried to get as much of that product as I possibly could, and occasionally we could still get Commander decks now, but certainly the packs are well gone. So it punched above its weight class, but it was one of those things that was a hit that none of us got to really capitalize on, because for the most part, all of us underordered, including Wizards, it seems like, because there's no product available. And then we moved on to Thunder Junction. Cowboys is sort of a weird thing socially. Like, Wild West isn't great in terms of the tropes that are sort of in the Wild West based on where we are as a people socially. So some of the stuff that you would think that you could lean into there, they didn't lean into for good reason. And then sometimes, like, the Wild West without guns to me is just very strange. Like, it's all about shootouts and the OK Corral and this thing and train robberies and so on and so forth. And they substituted magic in those spaces and things like that. But the Wild West is one of those areas that I don't know. I sort of equate it like Pirates. Like, it's fun to maybe have an evening there, but you're not going to do a long, these long campaigns for the most part. I mean, one of my favorite role-playing games is Deadlands, and I thought that was fantastic, and there was a lot of stuff to do in there. But Deadlands was very different than anything that I had sort of experienced before. And if you look at Hollywood, we don't take, maybe once a year we'll take a trip out west and we'll do something that's Wild West. But it just felt like when I looked at that calendar of sets, they were sort of just taking a look at what tropes they sort of hadn't covered before and decided to do a set based around those ideas. Like, they had whiteboarded this thing and they'd just gone down this list and started doing some things. And when I looked at it, I was like, man, it doesn't feel interconnected. It doesn't feel like the Magic story that I grew up on. What's going on here? So fast forward to Bloomburrow. Obviously, Bloomburrow did really well. It did well for us. I over-ordered at the end, which I think a lot of people did in general. Like, I have plenty of boxes, but again, it's 3 years of standard, so I'm not panicking about that. So I think Bloomburrow did exactly what we thought it was going to do. Bloomburrow is one of those sets where, if I take a look at how well the set performed and how well things did at the pre-release, it was one of those ones where I really wished for a lot of different reasons that we were going to follow Bloomborough with another set to Bloomborough. Now, I understand from the reality of their sales, the reason why they stopped doing blocks and why they even stopped doing partial blocks, because the second set never had the same punch in terms of sales as the first set. And when I'd heard that initially, and I think it was Mark Rosewater that was talking about it, I sort of didn't believe it. So I had to go back and I had to do some digging. I started looking at my own sales data. And early on in my retail career, I wasn't as... I didn't look as segmented as that. I would look at Magic as a category as a whole and compare it maybe quarter to quarter against itself. And, you know, I'd use some math as far as how many boxes of this set that I sell to inform what I was going to order the next set. But I wasn't really looking total block and that sort of thing. But what they said about their own sales mirrored mine when I went back in my sales data, which I can go back with my point of sale. I think I've got about 15 years worth of data. And I started looking at the block format, and I started looking at the 2-set block format and things like that. And he was right. You know, the second set didn't carry the way that the first set did. And I think that's largely the reason why we're seeing one set that's a bigger set that we're going to, and we're doing everything, and then we're moving on to the next one. The challenge for me on this Bloomborough transition into Duskmourn is I felt like Bloomborough was one of those big recruitment sets where it brought a whole ton of people to Magic, because we had furry woodland creatures and we were casting otters and we were, you know, birds and lizards and everything else and raccoons and stuff. And then all of a sudden the next step we're going is this Duskmourn House of Horrors thing. And I was like, man, we were already at Karlov's Manor and that was terrible. So how is this thing going to be any better? Duskmourn has definitely punched above its weight. It's outperformed what my expectations were. So overall, I'm happy about that. I think the biggest difference between Duskmourn and Karlov's Manor for me is just the width of what the genre can do. You know, there are two things that it sort of had going for it. They were able to touch all kinds of different spaces, whether it's, you know, Lovecraft themes or Stranger Things or Ghostbusters or a whole bunch of stuff. And then it was also timed so that it was released at the time of year when people care about spooky and scary stuff. So I think the timing, the set design, the broadness of what the genre allowed you to do, as opposed to, you know, based on how Karlov's sales went, I don't think we're ever going to see a set called, you know, Jace takes a trip through his walk-in closet. What's going to happen next? Like, that's not going to be a set they're going to do. I think they've realized that pigeonholing themselves into such a small place to be able to work with is just not going to work, even though they thought Clue and the murder mystery theme was a cool idea that they wanted to iterate on. It just fell flat, and there wasn't enough to it, and there wasn't enough ways to really tie those characters that you were familiar with based on the realm that they were in to anything outside of that house. So I think Duskmourn, just due to the width of it, certainly helped out. Did I ever think that we were going to see Machete as a Magic card? Not necessarily, but, you know, here we are with Hammer and a bunch of other stuff and tools and items and things. So overall, that set sold really well. So by and large, I went into this year for Magic thinking, looking at the way that the year ended and looking at what I thought about the strength of the sets this year, I really thought we were going to see probably a step back of 15 to 20%. I thought single sales were going to go down. I didn't see a lot of stuff on the horizon as far as Commander goes. Modern Horizons was also in the middle of that, which definitely sold better than what I thought it was going to sell, but a lot of that had to do with the price point. Modern Horizons feels like the upper limit of the price point threshold as far as what they can do for packs. Now I say that this isn't a challenge. If anybody from Wizards is listening, please don't try to bump it up another 25% and sell something above that, because it was a heavy lift, even though the set was pretty good. So overall, at the time of this recording, I think last week when I talked about where Magic was 16% above where it was last year. We sold so much Foundations and so many singles between last week and this week that we're like 18% above where we were last year. So as far as my take overall on the health of Magic and where Magic is for us as a store and in general for our community, it's 38% better than what I had predicted it was going to be, which is a really nice space to be in, especially when you consider how big of a chunk of the business it is. You know, Magic is probably 1/6 of what we do. If I take the totality of if I take what the sealed product is that we sell, if I take the singles that we sell, and this, again, to preface this, it's probably more because the majority of our online sales is Magic as well. But if I just look at front of the house, brick and mortar, Magic is a really big part of that. And if I take a look at what we make in terms of events on the Magic as well, now some of it is we run a lot more Magic events than anything else in the store. But the reason why we run a lot more Magic events than anything else in the store is because we sell that much of it. And the community shows up. And players play different formats. And we try different things out. And there's all kinds of different ways to sort of engage with that community. Wizards does a nice job of giving us different opportunities based on what they do through their WPN group. You know, it's far and away better than anything that any other publisher is giving us with regard to assets and promos and different things like that to sort of help us be able to promote the game in store. So let's move to the recent set, Foundations, and talk about why I was wrong on Foundations. I started retailing the first core set of Magic that I ever retailed was 8th edition. Core sets had a track record of being the set that came out in the summer. So colleges were out, our event attendance was down, everybody was doing vacations. This was, you know, well before there was Magic Arena was around, and there were a couple of other digital options that you could play on, Spell Table and different things like that. But by and large, paper Magic was the way that anybody was playing Magic at the time. They were always these very streamlined sets of Magic that sort of set the table for what the core cards were going to be for Standard every single year. There was a lot of repetition. There were, you know, we saw Shock year after year after year, and a bunch of different cards like that we could count on being in the core set forever. But it was, when you compared it side by side with the rest of the launches and the rest of the releases that customers were going to see at that time, they were a lot more complex. The core set was coming out at a time when recruitment levels were down. The recruitment stuff was really happening towards the fall, when there were more people coming into the game, more people coming into the stores, more people interacting, and less people on vacations. So the core set was out before the people started caring about what was going on with Magic. And, you know, summertime, a lot of times there were a lot of big tournaments for Magic, but nothing was really core set focused unless it was sort of forced to be that with pre-releases and such. When a new player decided to get into the game, if they started with core set and they tried to transition the stuff that they learned in the core set into the main game, sort of regardless of what the set was that was coming out of the new block or whatever, they were woefully ill prepared for it, because the core sets had flying, and they had vigilance, and they might have had first strike, you know, and a handful of trample was another thing that they had. There were a handful of different keywords that they had, but the text on the cards was not nearly as complicated as what the texts were on the regular sets and stuff. So core sets never sold that well. They tried to do different weird gimmicks with the big cards and the 10th edition boxes and different things like that, but it was just never a set that sold all that well. It wasn't well received. We banged our head against the wall trying to use it as a teaching tool, but what we would find is customers that bought a bunch of that stuff were typically sad because they didn't use a lot of the core set cards in their constructed decks anyway. It wasn't ever, I can't think of a core set that I really enjoyed limited, and I draft more than I play constructed. I'm a limited player to the core, and there was never a time when it was like a super limited experience. It was pretty on the nose exactly what you were going to do, and there was because there was no width or depth to the sets, there wasn't a lot of opportunity as far as iterating in what you were going to do with the game at that point. So part of the reason why I was wrong with Foundations is I just assumed that this was going to be another one of these trips in the core set, and that's not what they did with this at all. Finally, after years and years and years of putting out core sets that felt like they were trying to hide what was great about Magic, they just said, hey, Magic is a complicated game. There's complicated themes, there's complicated mechanics, it's a tough game to learn how to play, but this is who we are. And some people are going to like it, and some people are not going to like it, and that's okay. But I'd rather present you with a real take. I'd rather give you something that aligns with what you're going to see when the next set comes out. It's not flavored and themed in the same way that the set's going to be, but you can understand the texture of something. If you've had a cupcake for the first time, putting another thing of frosting on it is perfectly fine. If you had a cupcake and then you go and they're going to serve you a rack of lamb, that's not something that's going to be equitable as far as trying to equate what those two experiences are like. And this one, they've done a lot better. And when I say that, I have to give some hats off to the team that's there now. I know there's a lot of new faces and a lot of new names. You know, Mark Rosewater feels like the constant there. Like, they're just going to need that guy around forever, because it feels like he steers the game in a direction that's really, really beneficial. And he has kind of kept that thing going and iterated on it more so than anybody really. What Wizards has done is, it feels like they've taken the last year or so and they've started just slaughtering these sacred cows, right? So if I take a look at the way that Wizards has grown for many years, there was no such thing as licensing on a Magic product. And, as an early Magic player, the idea of, looking down and finding Rick from Walking Dead across the table from one of my planeswalkers was stomach turning to me. Like, that's not Magic. That's not my Magic. That's not how I want to play Magic. So when they went through and they started doing all the different licenses and things, it became this situation where I was worried that the game wasn't going to be the game that I wanted. And where I didn't think about it was how many people from the outside that maybe had heard about Magic but had never tried it because they felt like either they were 20 years behind in the story or they didn't have anything that was super relatable that was going to bring them in. So them making the decision that, okay, we're going to do, it's like everything else. They are a big ship that sort of turned slow. They started out with the silver bordered My Little Pony and Transformer cards and the Nerf card, and then they, slowly got some more feedback from that and got into more and more licenses. I didn't think I was going to sit down ever and want to play Magic and have Gandalf on one side of the board and a Chaos Space Marine on the other side of the board, and I'm giant growthing. Like, that was just a weird concept to try to wrap my head around as far as that goes. So they've sort of done the same thing as far as Foundations goes, in that they've said they've put out the starter products that they had, and they put out a set that was compelling to draft, which is always going to win for me. The starter products are a great way to sort of onboard a player in. Now, I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh my God, this is the most amazing starter product that's ever been known to man," and it's pretty good. I would still say that the Battle Academy that Pokemon did 2 years ago is the best starter product for any game ever. I took the beginner box home because I wanted to find out what the big deal was, and I decided I was going to unleash Magic on my girlfriend. She had never played before. Brought the box home. Here we go, and I'm gonna do this the way that it's prescribed inside of the box. So I open the box, lovely. Look at the cards. There's the 2 decks. We got the cats. We got the vampires. Then I hand her 28-page rule book, and then I take my 28-page rule book, and I'm like, boy, that's aggressive as far as what you need to do. And then there's a rules reference that was another 20 pages that I put off to the side, and I'm like, boy, we're starting it out with a full novel here. So as I opened that up, though, I noticed that a lot of that was just visual aids to make sure that the player was online with exactly how they wanted to take you through the 5-turn script that they had written for that particular experience. And it was Jace and Ajani sort of talking back and forth to the player about what's going to happen. And there was a QR code, so that I didn't click the QR code or use it. I'm sure there's a digital experience that does the same thing. That said, the sad part for me was the first thing they tell you to do is to take the foil off the packaging and turn it upside down and draw 7 cards. And I did that. Well, the 7 cards that I drew were not the 7 cards that I should have had because I had a visual aid that's there. So they actually packaged the box in a way where the cards were upside down and inverted as well. So in order to get to draw what I needed to draw based on the guided script, I had to play the deck face up from what they had instead of face down and draw that way, which it's fine. But I know from trying to use it as an onboarding tool and selling it to people with the idea that they can go home and they can learn to play this thing, that being the first experience and having the person go, oh, what's going on when you have this sort of complicated thing already, is going to be that's a pretty big miss. The box itself was fine. I didn't mind the fact that it had some, that had their version of smash up / jumpstart in the thing, so you could take half decks and stuff like that. I think that's a good way to learn the game. It was nice that each of those little packets of cards had its own flavor and theme, and it also introduced some keywords, so I was allowed to be able to do that, and we could try a whole bunch of stuff out. I think where I would have enjoyed if they had taken that product, or maybe even the starter product, a step further, would be if they had made it so that you could make those cards into packs of cards, and you could also teach the draft experience inside of that box. They could have put little markers on the cards or something like that that says, collect these cards, put these in pack 1, so on and so forth, so that we could have gotten even a little 2-player draft back and forth, so that you could have got onboarded with the limited experience. I think learning limited is a really hard skill set to sort of develop. It's not easy. It's not intuitive a lot of times. So I think that box could have had, it had plenty of paper in it as it was. They could have put another pamphlet in there and sort of deconstructed that a little bit and made it into a little bit of a miniature cube. All that to say, Foundations in general sold really well. We sold out, which I ordered significantly more than I had initially ordered. I initially ordered the least amount that I've ever ordered for any product ever for Magic, and I ordered a lot more than that as I got more knowledgeable about what the set was. I think the other big miss for it too was calling Jumpstart Foundations was a terrible idea. Those cards can't be used in Foundation. You're trying to onboard these people into a standard experience that everybody should feel the same way about, and it just isn't that way, because you can't the Jumpstart cards interact really well with your beginner box, but you can't play those with the cards that you open in the packs because they're not part of the sets, and their symbols are different, and that's kind of a mess. Like, I would have liked it more if they had decided in the calendar that they were going to insert that Jumpstart product maybe a month after the launch of Foundations and just called it, you know, Jumpstart 2025 or something like that, instead of putting the Foundations label on it. I think it's a good product that works well with those other products, and you certainly could have done a callback on the beginner box to say do that, but I don't think it should have been attached to this set the way that it was, sadly. So overall, though, hats off to them in general. I think as far as a core set and being able to onboard Magic players and things like that, I'm glad that they've decided to lead with their face a little bit here and say, well, you know what, Magic is a complicated game. There is a lot of interaction to it. It does take a little bit to learn, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that, though. Like, you don't have to, you know, before with the core sets, what they were doing was they were giving you checkers, and then you would get to the game, in the actual game, and all of a sudden you were playing, you know, some advanced version of chess, and you just weren't ready as a player to be able to do that. The other thing they did was Standard going from 2 years to 3 years, I think is a really good choice. It gives a lot more meat and a lot more juice out of the cards that are in the Standard block. I think there's a lot more opportunity to iterate on decks. I think overall it is probably going to increase the power level of what those decks are, and one of two things could happen. Either there's a very good standout Standard deck that is the real cream of the crop, and that thing just pounds on everybody. I'll be interested to see, and I know, you know, Bill Jensen is on the team, and a handful of other people that get to make the decision about that. He's a phenomenal player. I met him in 2003 at Grand Prix, Louisiana. Just a great dude, and somebody that really knows the game very well. I hope that they are good about taking a look at what the meta looks like in the Standard format and understand that the massiveness of what the card pool looks like now, and maybe they're a little bit more heavy-handed and then light-handed in certain ways when it comes to banned and restricted. I'd like to see them knock some things down and then bring some things back and stuff like that. It would be cool if it was more of a fluid format, if it gets a little bit top-heavy as far as the decks go. If the deck diversity is wide and there's 6 to 8 decks that are there that are flying around, I think that's okay. So my concern with Standard is more about sort of the way that they're going to manage the meta, so that the meta feels like it's relevant each time. And the other thing they decided to do this year is they just took the gloves off completely on Universes Beyond, and now Universes Beyond can play in Standard as well, which is fantastic, because I certainly complained loudly that it was really difficult for me to have a bunch of customers come in that wanted to buy Magic cards because it was Lord of the Rings, and then I had to say to them, you can't play those Lord of the Rings sets in the most recent Standard format. You have to play it in the World Beater format over here. That's a whole bunch of a giant collection of cards, and it was complicated. The set just came out. I'm buying this pack. Okay, I can't play this pack in what's the most recent set and what's the most recent format. So not being able to play the cards that you just opened that day, that just released that day, in the format that's supposed to be the most recent sets, on top of the fact that most customers that come in don't realize what formats are if they're just approaching the game because they like Lord of the Rings or they like Doctor Who. Doctor Who, I guess, is probably a worse example because that's mostly Commander decks that are being sold there, but we sold some packs there as well. But in general, not having to have that conversation or do that extra leaping thing or let people get into it, I think it makes sense. It feels like an easier task for design as well, like design down to what Standard is. Now that said, it does mean that there's a lot more cards that are going to be flooding into Standard this year than what were there last year, because we've got a whole bunch of sets that are coming out, and all of them are going to be Standard legal. I don't remember seeing a Masters set or anything like that. I guess Innistrad Remastered is coming out, but I didn't see a Commander set. I didn't see a Modern Horizon set or anything like that on this year's calendar thus far. So let me jump just quickly to this year's calendar. So I've got some concerns as far as this year's calendar goes. So they have Aether Drift coming. So first, I guess my hot take for the video is Innistrad Remastered is going to come out. It's going to be woefully underordered. I think that set's going to punch well above its weight class. I just have a hunch. They've done a bunch of these remastered sets and they haven't really hit one really hard. And I think after they've tried this a couple of different times, I think they're going to nail it on this. Now, I say this fully knowing that we've probably sick of Innistrad in general, but I think this set is going to be one that matters. Most people are going to under order, and it's going to punch above its weight class in general. That's how I feel about it. I think this is the time when they finally correct it and they finally figure it out. Aether Drift, I have the same concern about that as I have about Karlov Manor, right? And what I mean by that is this feels like just whatever this 2 or 3 or whiteboard was, where every topic or everything that is popular in pop culture, let's try to smash the whole thing together and let's make sure that we're doing a Magic set for that. So this is Fast and the Furious meets Mad Max. If they were to tell me we're bringing Magic post-apocalyptic, cool, I'm in. A post-apocalyptic Magic setting, even if it's modern or something like that, I'm down. But this post-apocalyptic thing that has to revolve around racing and different stuff like that, I wish they would have just chosen a lane. Like, don't do the racing thing, or don't highlight the racing thing as the reason for the set. Magic isn't about racing. It's about casting spells and what people are doing and things like that. And you're highlighting this planeswalker on a bike all the time. And I've sold other games where racing was the theme. I mean, the least watched Yu-Gi-Oh set ever was the one where they were racing around with the stupid cards on their arms. It was terrible. 5Ds was terrible. It was just awful, right? So I don't have high hopes for that set. Now, you know, it could be a banger, but I feel like they're just trying to do too much, and they should have just focused on the environment rather than the theme of the environment, which is this thing. Like, post-apocalyptic sounds chef's kiss to me. Post-apocalyptic where I'm racing cars and jet bikes and things like that, not so much. Tarkir Dragonstorm, I'm a little bit more enthused on. I think we're going to get a whole lot of dragons. I'm assuming, based on the little blurbs and stuff like that, that maybe we're finally going to get a dragon set that's focused on dragons, sort of the way that War of the Spark was focused on planeswalkers. Tarkir's a good world for that. That should be fun. So that's one that I feel good about. The other stuff that they have coming, I think Final Fantasy is going to be the best-selling Magic set ever. Edge of Eternity's Cosmic Space set, that ain't it for me. I don't feel good about that set. Part of the reason I don't feel good about that set is it's space and it's cosmos. Marvel did the Eternals. The Eternals was bad. The cosmic stuff outside of tongue-in-cheek Guardians of the Galaxy, which the last movie didn't do as well as the other ones, is not a place where I think there's a lot of reverence or love for. I know there's a bunch of opportunities as far as what they can do with gods and different things like that, but I talked to a handful of different publishers. They were trying to sell games to Target. The Target buyer said, we'd like only nature stuff. We'd like woodland stuff. We don't want anything to do with space. So maybe Target's off as far as what they think the community, what they think their market's going to want. And the Target market is obviously different than the Magic market, and they've probably already got this set in the can. But Edge of Eternities is not something that I'm really hyped up for. Spider-Man, on the other hand, is my favorite superhero in the entire planet. So I'm a giant mark for that. I know he's the biggest, most expensive property in all of Marvel too. So take that, X-Men and Avengers. It's just the truth. Deadpool as well. Spider-Man punches way above the weight class of the rest of those guys. He is Marvel's version of Batman's DC, which would be cool. I will take a swing at what I think the Universes Beyond set is that they haven't announced, and I'll just say that it's Star Wars and that they're going to try to time it at the same time that the movie comes out in 2025. So that's my big reach for today. I guess I'll wrap it up really quick with some wish list stuff. I wish that they would look at possibly putting a Teams Limited event on the calendar somewhere. Teams Limited used to be a blast. It used to be really good for international play and stuff. I'd really like to see them have an event where the focus was just Teams Limited from a player perspective and a retailer's perspective in terms of being able to run some sort of aspirational events to do that. I wish Grand Prix came back too. Magic cons are phenomenal. My friend Alan, Pastimes, that crew runs the best events in the world as far as Magic events or any CCG events at all for that matter. They just have the infrastructure and they have the team to be able to do that. You saw the difference between the Magic 30 event, and they iterated on that, and the Magic cons have just been absolutely wild and crazy. And you might have me on a plane for the first time in February going out to Chicago to attend one of those. So I'm hyped up about that. I'm actually excited about Magic in general. Like, I fired up my Magic Arena account. I hadn't done that in about 2.5 years. I had a whole ton of packs kind of just sitting there and stuff. So I've been drafting like a lunatic because that's what I am. I'm a limited Magic player. I play some Standard now because I've got the cards to do it, and I don't know, it feels like I paid 10% of what I pay in paper to play on Arena, which, you know, I could have an Arena hatred story all the time, but it does allow me the opportunity to play it at 1 o'clock in the morning when nobody else is here to play. So I think I'm going to wrap it up with that. So I have high hopes for Magic as far as moving into next year. I'm excited with the changes that they've made it's good that the team has recognized that some of those things that were sort of these tentpole old man syndrome things, they just got rid of, and they said, the hell with it. We're looking to move this game forward, and we're looking to progress in a way where some of the things that we did before we're going to do differently, and we're going to try out some new things too. And it's not all going to work, but at least we're going to bring a whole bunch of eyes in. I mean, if the publisher's working to bring more players to my store to be able to show them what I have to sell, I can't beat that. I mean, I know there was some conversations about their ad space and what they do on Amazon and so on and so forth, but to try to tell them they shouldn't be selling on the largest sales platform in the entire planet, but they should be selling to me and I'm going to carry the same weight, it feels like a real stretch for me, even with the size of the store that we have. So again, I'll wrap up with that. Next week, we're going to talk all about Black Friday, what we're doing as far as a retail store goes for Black Friday sales, our takes on that, my mentality on Black Friday, why I started doing Black Friday sales 6 or 7 years ago after going for 8 or 9 years without doing Black Friday at all, and then doing Small Business Saturday as well. So that'll probably be recorded on Tuesday because Wednesday is Turkey Day and Friday is Black Friday. So I think we'll look at maybe hopefully having the video up by Wednesday instead, and Tuesday will be the day that we'll go live. So thanks everybody for watching and all the subs and all the comments. Happy gaming.